welcome to Rock Book Show. I'm Kimberly Austin, and joining me again in the Magic Box, I shouldn't say again, they don't know what we've talked before, Ferris, is D.X.Ferris. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Thanks
here.
for having me again.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, he's here not just because he's a nice guy and wanted to hang out on Skype, but he also has this cool book, Slayer 62 and 2/3, The Jeff and Dave Years. And then you can read the rest of the title on Amazon. So you are a huge Slayer fan. Let's say that right up front.
Yes, I am.
So you were the guy to write this book. You were going to school me a little bit in Slayer today, so I'm excited about that. But let's start with that. Why you wanted to write the book about this particular span of years and why you kind of chose Jeff and Dave as the central characters.
Got it. Well, I mean, Slayer is, I'm 40-something. And Slayer is one of the few things that has held my attention consistently since I was in 8th grade when I first became aware of them. So yeah, it's something deep and personal to me. This is my second book about the band. The first one I wrote in 2007, published in 2008. And that was part of a collection of books called 33 1/3, which are books by different writers. And mine was about the Rain and Blood album. Every one of those books is about a different classic album by a different significant artist. You know, maybe not the biggest artist in the world, but something that is significant, iconic in some way. And that's what my first book was about, Slayer. When I went into it, I didn't know what approach I was going to take exactly. I had plan A and plan B and plan C. And plan A was what I was ultimately able to do was talk to the band and interview them and get them to actually participate in it. But if they were not interested in the book that I was contracted for, then I wanted to write more generally about thrash metal and heavy metal and that kind of thing. And so I was able to do that. I talked to the band. I had a lot of good material and not all of it fit. And then last year when Dave Lombardo, the drummer, the most influential and acclaimed heavy metal drummer ever, he left the band for the third and final time over the course of like 20 years last year. And I was going to write a very short book about it and turned into a pretty long book. Long story short.
You had one plan and that morphed into another, and then Jeff passed away, which really changed everything too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My initial plan was to write a very short ebook about Lombardo's turbulent history with the band because when they recorded Rain and Blood, when I wrote the previous book, they were all getting along pretty well. There was some tension off and on, but after that, after the record came out, the relationship just fell apart and then it was kind of patched over. But my original intention was to write a short book about Lombardo's history with the band and have it out by the end of April, and that was it. I had a few months to do that, and just one thing after another stopped me. I kept getting sick. Every time I would sit down to work, I'd suddenly get a call from the school, and one of my kids was sick. I needed to go pick them up. I just couldn't get it done. And at the end of April 2013, the book wasn't done, and I was just furious. Smoke was coming out of my ears. I was so frustrated. And then May 1st comes along and I'm still angry because I couldn't get this simple book done. And May 2nd comes along all day long. I'm still very angry that I couldn't finish the book. And then about evening time on the East Coast, word breaks that Jeff Hanneman died. You know, the guy who by all accounts was the soul of the band, the most prolific writer, the guy that really made the most difference in Slayer being the kind of band it is, not just a big metal band, but really giving the band its kind of crossover and unusual, unconventional edge that it had. And there I was with the Slayer book half written. So that, to put it mildly, it expanded the scope of the project.
Did you, as somebody from the outside looking in, did you think Jeff would have come back and toured more with Slayer had he not passed away?
Maybe. I mean, he was working toward it. I mean, he was last on the stage a couple years ago, and not that far after when he was released. But I mean, it's hard to say. Ultimately, I from statements that his wife has made, he didn't want to do the rehab. Basically, I mean, anybody that's ever been hurt can tell you that rehab is not fun. And he wanted to continue playing guitar and working on it, but it wasn't as simple as just doing nothing but playing guitar. I guess there was a lot of other physical activity that he just wasn't really interested in doing. You can kind of understand that. But he was still writing, certainly. You know, one of the last things he did was to send a song to Tom Araya, and that is going to apparently be considered, at least, for the new album that they're working on.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned how this book is very character driven, and as somebody who's not a fan, it was such an interesting read for me as well, because I enjoyed, you can immediately see the roles of each guy in the band. But again, for somebody who might not know Slayer, how do you describe each guy's role?
Man, I mean, Slayer, what I tried to do for the book is, I think I did it even more in my first book, and this one to a lesser degree. I think it's kind of a lot to ask people to read a whole book about Slayer if they're just music fans, but not necessarily metal fans. And you know, I read a lot of metal books, and to me, the ones that don't work as well are the ones that just say, well, the band did this, and the band did that, and the band did that, because you're just writing about things that have happened. So what I tried to do in it was get into the individual personalities and try to show how the personalities affected the impact of, you know, this decision and that decision, and why this thing happened and why that didn't happen. So I think it's important to understand who those guys are. To answer your question, Jeff Hanneman was kind of, you know, I think it was Tom Araya that said he was, you know, if not the soul of the band, then that he was the band. You know, he was the kind of unsung, not unsung, people know who he was, but he was the guy that didn't want the spotlight. You know, he wasn't out there beating his chest and saying, hey, I wrote all these songs. But he was the guy in the back that just, all he wanted to do was write the music. And, you know, he wasn't in it for the spotlight, and he was the poet of the band. I mean, he was not an English major, certainly, but he was the guy that wrote the most poetic lyrics. He was the guy that did a lot of reading in the band. You know, he was the kind of guy that was purely about the art. So you have him. You have Kerry King, on the other hand, the other co-lead guitarist, who was very much the captain of the band. You know, Kerry King is the guy that just drives the band and says, we have to go, 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 go. And always sort of making things happen and making sure that the band stays consistent and making sure that the band stays on brand, even before that was a trendy topic. You know, he had a very good sense of how the other bands that he idolized sort of went wrong over the years. So he's always been the guy saying, listen, this is what Slayer is. This is what it needs to be. We need to focus on this. And I'm going to lead, follow, or everybody else should get the hell out of the way.
Yeah, he had such a clear vision. That was really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as so many music fans, I mean, myself, I'm sure you know, he's been disappointed by so many of his favorite bands over the years that made a lot of questionable judgment calls, and that sort of walked away from what made them special and tried something else. So that's Kerry King. Tom Araya, the vocalist, you know, he's written a lot of their best songs, but he has not written a lot with the band. Yeah, he's the front man. He's the face of the band. He is the first guy that people see, but he has not been a driving force in the band. He's kind of been along for the ride. And that's certainly not to minimize his contributions or his role in the band, but, you know, it's always been kind of about Kerry and Jeff putting something together, and he's been the mouthpiece for the band. And, you know, again, I don't mean that to trivialize his role. Slayer wouldn't be Slayer without him. And then you have Dave Lombardo, you know, who, as we talked about, he's had a very tumultuous history with the band, very frictious, very fractious. You know, he's been in and out of the band 3 times. I think he's gone forever now. And he, you know, on one hand, Lombardo was the most acclaimed musician in the band, the one that people look at and say, wow, he's the best at what he does. But people in the band always relegated him to being the absolute lowest guy on the totem pole in the band, and that caused a few problems over the years, to put it mildly.
Yeah, that was bizarre to me. I mean, here's this guy who, Slayer isn't Slayer without your drummer, especially such an iconic drummer.
Absolutely.
And why are you treating him like that? You know, the more rock bios and histories you read, you start to get a better sense of why bands sometimes don't get along. but still, as a fan, you're like, please get along. What's your problem? And Slayer in particular was so loyal to management that I'd never seen before, but yet not to each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very dysfunctional family. You know, it's like these four brothers that just do not, you know, they've even admitted as such. You know, if they could go back to 1986 and simply communicate with each other a little bit better, things could have been a lot different. But, you know, when you're at the prime of your life and your physical prime and you just have a lot of testosterone going through you and hormones, and there's a lot of momentum going and everybody's very busy, you can't just take the time and say, yeah, frankly, there are a few problems, Carrie, and I don't feel appreciated, so let's talk about this. So they just have never been able to really communicate very directly, and that led to a lot of problems.
Yeah.
You know,
Couldn't
he
they
hasn't
just
received. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, couldn't they just Metallica it out? Couldn't they? But you know, so having said that, it's interesting that they didn't want to just stay together for money. Because let's face it, they could have made a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the biggest things I realized, and again, I've written a book about Slayer before, but one of the huge things I never realized before going into this book was how little the band tours. I mean, they do tour. It's not like they never tour, but I mean, there'll be times when they take a whole year off. You know, it's not uncommon for them to have done that over the past 30 years, to take the better part of 2 years off. South of Heaven, which was a massive album for them, I think they only played, I forget what it is offhand, maybe 60 shows for, and that was it. And you know, normally bands would stay on the year for, or stay on the road for a year, maybe two for those. So, I mean, people accuse Slayer of doing things for money and for cashing in, but they really could have done a lot more to cash in and sort of squeeze it for the money than they have.
And they're also a band who doesn't have a lot of extra songs laying around either.
No, you know, unless they, you know, like Led Zeppelin, I say in the book, unless they have some kind of secret stash of songs they've recorded over the years, which I have no reason to believe they do. You know, when Slayer has 10 songs done, the album is done. You know, they don't just keep on writing and recording and coming up with a few extra ones. I mean, when they have enough songs that they need, that's it. They're done. And that's how they work, for better or worse.
I want to know your opinion, Ferris, about Rick Rubin and how he changed or enhanced or didn't. What has he done for Slayer that you think is his legacy, maybe?
Wow, you know, that's Slayer just recently split with Rick Rubin. I mean, they're not working with him for the first time in, well, it depends how you count it. Some people would tell you that they haven't been working with him for 20 years now. I think the band feel that way. The Slayer have been connected to him in some way, shape, or form since 1985, 1986. And you know, that's odd. You know, Slayer was his only band left over from the 80s. He was by far their oldest client, and they're not anymore. If you look at the album that happened before Rain and Blood, Hell Awaits, I mean, that was an album that is, what, 37 minutes long. It has 7 songs on it. So you have a lot of 6-minute songs about vampires and demons and necrophilia, which I love. I'm not minimizing that. And then the next album that they released on Rick Rubin's label was Rain and Blood, which is 10 songs and 28 minutes. And Rubin is this consummate, you know, he's a guy that has a real extreme background. He loves punk, he loves metal, he loves the rough stuff, but he has a real pop sensibility too. And over the years, he's been able to lend that to so many of his artists, show them how to make their songs better and how to make them a little bit more polished. So a lot of people reasonably credit Rick Rubin for Slayer becoming better songwriters, but that's wrong. That's wrong. Rain and Blood was written before he signed them. And so maybe over the years, I'm pretty sure this is part of Slayer's overall psychology. I think they feel that he deserved too much credit for their songwriting and for what they did. And I think that played no small role in them splitting with him eventually. Now, again, they've had 20 years to resent him, so I'm sure money played a larger factor in them splitting at this point. You know, if you're selling 500,000, 800,000, a million records, you know, then splitting all your proceeds with Rick Rubin and his record label, that's one thing. But in this day and age, when you're selling 50, 100,000, I don't know how much they sell these days, 200,000, then giving the lion's share of the record money to your record label, maybe that's not as lucrative a proposition. So yeah, they have this long and complicated relationship with him where people look at Slayer and reasonably think, well, he must be helping them with the songs, and maybe he doesn't that much. And I think this would have been a golden opportunity for them to really sit down and reunite with him in the studio and have him make sure that their songs are as good as they can be with Hanneman gone. But they have decided not to do that.
Wow.
I don't know if that's the best decision, but
there it is. So then I got to give Slayer fans props, because through all of this madness, Slayer fans are Slayer fans to the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, but famously, a few fans have carved Slayer into their arms, and not a lot of Slayer fans look at that and think, well, that's too extreme. I don't know if I would do that. You know, we generally look at that and go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you carved Slayer into your forearm. That makes sense.
So what is it? What's at the core of the Slayer fan? Who are they?
Slayer fans are metal people, you know, and metal people just, you know, they're loyal. You know, they're people that, you know, for whatever reason have really embraced this music. And it's so hard to stay good in that field, you know. Music, unlike sports teams, you know, when you like a band, maybe it won't be around 30 years later. You know, you can being a Yankees fan, and the Yankees will always be the Yankees, more or less, you know. They'll have bad years, but they'll rebuild the team. And, you know, 20 years later with a whole different set of people, yeah, they're back in the saddle and they're great. With a band, if you lose one guy, that's quite often it. You know, never get better again. You never recover. And Slayer for, you know, 30, 35 years has been our team. You know, Slayer has been our guys that are, you know, for 20 of the 30 years they've existed, it's been the same four guys. It's been Hanneman, King, Lombardo, Araya. So Slayer is our team. They're pure and they do it. They've never sold out. They never had massive crossover success like Metallica. And that leaves them ours, you know. I mean, Metallica have written ballads. Metallica have written the kind of songs you can slow dance to at your prom. They've written sequels to that ballad. I mean, so if you're a Metallica fan, you have to share them with a lot of people. But if you're a Slayer, Slayer is your band and it belongs to you. And there's not a lot of fake Slayer fans out there.
You guys really like the new music too. You don't want to see them go on a greatest hits tour.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. Speaking of which, I guess kind of. So Slayer's going to play Rain and Blood at Riot Fest in Chicago. Right. How do you feel about that?
That's good. I mean, you know, it's that album. You know, I used to sit in my room in high school just bored, listening to the same album over and over again and fantasize about being able to hear that live in its entirety in sequence. And that's great. You know, I mean, they've done it before, but it's the kind of thing that you want to see. You want to see it happen.
And are you demanding I want the blood to rain. I want all the pyro.
We'll see what they do. I mean, it's become a convention. I mean, now that it's so common to hear an entire album or to play an entire album live, it's become a kind of accepted variation to play with the order a little bit. When you have a top-heavy album like, it's not a top-heavy album. Some of the other bands do it with top-heavy albums. But if you have Angel of Death as the first song, maybe they'll play with it and play it backwards, you know, start up with Raining Blood as they used to way, way, way back in the day, and then end it with Angel of Death as they so often do. That might be a way to do it. So even though we know more or less what we're going to get out of that set. I think there's still room for them to surprise us some with it. I wouldn't be surprised to see them play it backwards.
You also, in our conversations, and you may have mentioned it in the book, I can't remember now, but I love how you say we're just living in a Slayer-like world at this point. And I'd love for you to explain that to people. And one of the reasons I know you say that is because you're a huge Game of Thrones fan, and you also do a recap show on diffuser.fm, which is so cool.
Yeah, every week for diffuser.fm, I do heavy metal Game of Thrones reviews.
I just love that.
Yeah, Game of Thrones is, I think, the most metal show on TV. And I used to say that about different shows as a joke, but it eventually became true. You know, I used to look at Californication, the show creator, Tom Capinos. He works a lot of Slayer references into it. So I started a few years ago jokingly saying, well, this is the most metal show on TV, because there weren't any metal shows on TV. But over the years, the culture has become increasingly, if not metal, then overlapping with metal. I mean, Game of Thrones is about long-haired guys in armor wielding steel, in massive melees, fighting for power. It's metal, it's like watching a bunch of your favorite metal bands go at it. Some of the situations in Game of Thrones read very well if you look at them as metaphors for the relationship people would have with a record label, maybe.
Right, that's awesome.
And, look at one of the most popular shows on TV, Walking Dead. I mean, the key demographic of 18 to 49, it's the most popular show. Things like vampires, zombies. There are 4 vampire shows on TV right now.
And more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Culture has become a lot more metal. I mean, we've been at war for over a decade now in some way, shape, or form. So it's not just fantastic things that Slayer writes about. I mean, Slayer wrote about, military suicides and post-traumatic stress and blood and war and things like that. They've always written about that. So Slayer was doing its thing 30 years ago, and the culture has become increasingly like a Slayer song. So as I say at the beginning of the book, this is Slayer's world, and we are just living in it.
Yeah, it kind of sounds that way. But I also think you just got onto a new reality show of metal bands fighting each other Game of Thrones style. Love that. Don't steal that. That's Ferris's idea. Hey, Ferris, thanks so much for hanging in and coming into our world, into our Slayer world, and schooling us all. I appreciate it. And honestly, I can highly recommend the book to fans who are not Slayer, just general music fans, who are not Slayer fans necessarily. If you love rock history, you love to see how the inner workings of a band are, it's really, really cool read.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to write it for the people who are metalheads and for the people who are not. I really put a lot of effort into it. It's a full-length biography, 33 photos, 59 chapters, 3 appendices if you get the ebook. Full index to it. So even if you're not a metal person, if you just want to read a half-decent rock book, I think you might dig it.
I think you will dig it. D.X.Ferris.
SlayerBio.com is the website.
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
SlayerBio, B-I-O.com.
SlayerBio.com. That's D.X.Ferris, everybody.